Welcome to Spider Tales. Parents preferred my brother. They didn't come to my wedding, so I didn't tell them about my son. Let's get straight to the point. Growing up in the shadow of my brother Lucio was always a challenge. For as long as I can remember, he was the center of my parents' attention. Lucio was the prodigy, the pride of the family, the golden boy who could do no wrong. Everything he did was exalted, celebrated, and any failure, no matter how small, was quickly forgotten. I, on the other hand, seemed invisible to them. My childhood memories are marked by a constant feeling of being ignored. I remember every time I got a high grade in school, only to be greeted with a nod or an absent-minded comment, while any small achievement of Lucio's, such as winning a football game at school, was celebrated with gifts and praise. The unfairness of it all fueled a flame of resentment within me, a flame that only grew with time. As Lucio grew up, he became everything my parents had ever dreamed of. He graduated with honors, landed an enviable job at a large corporation, and was surrounded by friends and admirers. My parents, of course, were there every step of the way, applauding his achievements and bragging about his success to anyone who would listen. I followed a different, more modest, but still meaningful path. I landed a steady job, made good friends, and eventually met the love of my life, Carla. But as always, nothing I did seemed to matter to my parents. They never asked about my work, never took an interest in my friendships, and rarely bothered to get to know Carla. When I tried to tell them something about my life, I would get only monosyllabic answers, while they quickly turned the conversation back to Lucio. Over the years, I learned to live with this indifference, but the resentment never went away. And then something happened that changed everything. Carla and I found out we were expecting a baby. The news was a shock, but it also brought indescribable happiness. For the first time, I felt that something in my life was entirely mine, something that my parents could not ignore or disregard. But at the same time, a doubt grew within me. Did I really want my parents to know? When Carla and I discussed the possibility of telling my parents, she was understanding, but she also believed that we should give them a chance to get involved. Carla, I know things haven't been easy with your parents, but I think we should tell them. Maybe with a grandchild, things will change. I nodded, knowing that her intentions were good, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that if I told them, somehow they would find a way to make the birth of my son revolve around Lucio. Me? I don't know, Carla. They've never cared about anything I've done. I'm afraid they'll just focus on how it affects Lucio like they always do. She looked at me with concern. Carla, I understand, but what if it's different this time? What if they really care? Doubt consumed me. Was it possible that the arrival of a grandchild could change the family dynamic? Maybe, but I wasn't willing to take the risk. I decided that, at least for now, I wouldn't tell them. I wanted to enjoy the happiness of pregnancy without Lucio's shadow hanging over everything. Months passed and Carla and I prepared for the baby's arrival. The secret I was keeping from my parents felt like a bubble, ready to burst at any moment. Every time I saw them or spoke to them, the tension grew. They didn't realize it, but the distance between us was growing bigger and bigger. But like all things that are kept secret, this one too had its expiration date. The bubble burst in a way I couldn't foresee. We were at a family gathering, something that happened rarely and almost always revolved around Lucio. He, as always, was the center of attention, talking about his latest achievements at work. My parents were sitting next to him, smiling and laughing proud. Carla and I were in a corner, trying to keep up a side conversation, but it was hard not to feel the familiar feeling of invisibility. At some point, Carla had to leave the room to answer a call, and without thinking much, she left her cell phone on the table. I didn't think anything of it until I heard my mother ask Lucio. My mother, so Lucio, any exciting news? Before he could answer, Carla's phone, still on the table, vibrated. The screen lit up with a message notification, and before I could reach for it, my mother picked up the cell phone. My mother, whose cell phone is this? I tried to take it back, but my curious mother had already read the notice. Her expression changed, first to confusion, then to surprise, and finally to something I could only describe as disappointment. My mother, why didn't you tell us you were having a baby? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, waiting for an explanation. Lucius looked confused but curious, while my father simply shook his head in disapproval. Carla, who had just returned, stood in the doorway pale. Me, because I didn't think you would care. My mother was visibly hurt. My mother, how can you say that? Of course we care. I laughed, but without humor. Me, you've never cared about anything in my life. Why should this be any different? My father finally spoke, his voice low but firm. My father, we are your family, your name. You should have told us. It's our right to know. Me, right? You've never given me anything but indifference. I didn't want you to turn this into another opportunity to highlight Lucio. Lucio, hey, don't involve me in this. It's not my fault. Me, I know, Lucio. It's not your fault. But you don't understand what it's like to live in someone's shadow all the time. I didn't want my son to start life the same way. The silence that followed was heavy. My parents didn't know what to say, and for the first time, I saw an expression of uncertainty on their faces. Perhaps, for the first time, they were realizing the impact that their preference for Lucio had had on me. But at the same time, I knew that it wouldn't be that easy to change things. After that day, the relationship with my parents became even more tense. They tried to get more involved, but it was clear that the resentment I felt was difficult to overcome. They started calling more frequently, trying to find out about the pregnancy, but I kept an emotional distance, responding curtly and evasively. Carla, on the other hand, thought I should give them a chance. Carla, they seem to be trying your name. Maybe you should let bygones be bygones and let them be a part of our son's life. But I couldn't. Every time they tried to reach out, I felt like they were forcing something that didn't feel natural, like they were fulfilling an obligation and not really wanting to be there. The situation reached its boiling point when Lucio got promoted again, and my parents decided to throw a big party to celebrate. It was the same old story, and I knew that the arrival of my son would be just another footnote to the event. During the party, my parents barely mentioned the pregnancy. Instead, they spent most of the time praising Lucio and his accomplishments. When family members asked about the pregnancy, my parents would give vague answers, as if it were just a small distraction from the grandeur of Lucio's success. Carla, who had tried to maintain a positive outlook until then, began to see things from my point of view. That night, as we drove home, she finally broke down. Carla, I can't defend this anymore. They really don't care, do they? I didn't need to answer. The silence in the car was enough to confirm it. A few months later, our son was born. It was the happiest moment of my life, and for a few days, I completely forgot about the problems with my parents. All that mattered was this little being who now depended on me and Carla for everything. In those early days, I didn't let anyone take away the happiness I felt. But eventually, my parents insisted on seeing their grandson. Reluctantly, I agreed to allow a visit, but it was clear to me that things were still far from resolved. When they arrived, they were surprised to see that I hadn't told Lucio about the baby's birth. In fact, Lucio didn't even know that Carla had already given birth. My mother, why didn't you call your brother? He's part of the family, too. I sighed, tired of the conversation. Me, because this is my moment, Mom. He's my son. I don't want everything to revolve around Lucio, like it always has. My father, you're being selfish, your name. You're trying to cut your family off. Me, maybe because I never felt like I belonged. You always preferred Lucio. Always. Now that I have my own family, I'm choosing how I want it to be. The tension in the room was palpable. My parents were clearly uncomfortable with my openness, but I didn't care. I had been holding these feelings in for a long time, and now with my son in my arms, I wasn't about to back down. My mother, we never meant to make you feel this way, honey. Me, maybe not, but you did it. They left shortly after, without insisting any further. I knew I had created a barrier between us, but for the first time, I felt it was a necessary barrier. As time went on, my parents made less of an effort to get closer. They still treated Lucio as their favorite son, but now there was a clear distance between them and me. Even when we saw each other at family events, our interactions were brief and formal. I knew I would never have the relationship with my parents that I had always wanted, but I was at peace with that. I had built my own family with Carla and our son, and I was determined not to repeat the mistakes my parents had made. Lucio, in turn, began to notice the change in the family dynamic. One afternoon, he called me something rare. Lucio, dude, what's going on with you and our parents? I hesitated, but decided to be honest. Me, they've always preferred you, Lucio. It's always been that way. I'm tired of trying to compete for attention, so I'm focusing on my own family now. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Lucio answered. Lucio, I didn't know you felt that way. Me, of course you didn't know. They've always given you everything. Why would you notice? Lucio didn't have an immediate answer. It was clear that this revelation took him by surprise, but for me, it didn't matter so much anymore. What mattered was that, for the first time in my life, I was living for myself, for my family, without worrying about what my parents or my brother thought. The months passed, and although the relationship with my parents remained distant, I began to notice a change in myself. For the first time, I was at peace with who I was, with the decisions I had made. My focus was on my family, my life, and not on the expectations that my parents had never met. One day, while I was walking with Carla and our son in the park, I received a text from my mother. It was a simple message, but it was loaded with meaning. My mother, I'm sorry for how things went. We'd like to try again, if you'll let us. It was a text I never expected to receive, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to maintain the distance I had finally managed to establish. But another part, perhaps the part that was still seeking some form of validation, considered the possibility. I told Carla about the message, and she smiled. Carla, it's your decision, your name. If you think it's worth it, maybe it's time to give it another chance. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive completely, but I also didn't want to live with regrets. Maybe this time things could be different. Maybe with my son in the picture, my parents would finally see the value I had always had, even if belatedly. I responded to my mother's message cautiously, but with a glimmer of hope. Let's take it one step at a time. And so, with a new beginning in sight, I closed the loop on a lifetime of invisibility, ready to build a future where my son would never have to compete for love or attention. The path would be difficult, and the outcome uncertain, but at least this time the choice was mine. Meetings with my parents began tentatively, like two wary parties testing the waters before a dive. There were missteps, hesitations, and a constant feeling that something could go wrong at any moment. But surprisingly, they seemed to be genuinely trying. My mother, who had previously cared only about Lucio, was now more interested in her grandson. She brought gifts, wanted to know every detail of his life, and even began to show me a warmth that I had never received. My father, who had always been reserved, now asked questions about my work, something he had never done before. My mother, he's so much like you when you were a baby. I think I'm finally seeing things differently. I watched their efforts warily, waiting for the moment when everything would go back to the way it had been. But as the months passed, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, people could change. Lucio remained the star of the family, but now there was a new shining light, and it was my son. He brought the family together in a way I could never have predicted. The comparison still existed, but not with the same intensity as before. I had something that Lucio didn't have, the experience of creating a new life, and that brought me a kind of recognition that I never imagined I would have. There is still a lot to be resolved. The resentment and pain don't disappear overnight. But for the first time, I feel like I'm building something real with my parents, something that can last. And so, the story that began with a life of invisibility and pain is turning into a tale of redemption and new opportunities. It's not a perfect ending, but it is the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where I am seen, where I am loved, and where I can love back without fear. And most importantly, a chapter where my son will never have to doubt his parents' love. I will be for him what I never had, and with that, maybe finally, I will find the peace I've always sought. The story of Gabriel and his family began with bonds that seemed unbreakable. He was the eldest son, and since he was young, he was always seen as an example to be followed. Hardworking, disciplined, and with a strong sense of responsibility, Gabriel always knew what he wanted from life. He worked hard, built a solid career, and, over time, became a successful businessman, owner of a respected company in the market. However, the same could not be said of his younger brother, Leon. Leon was always the opposite of Gabriel. Since he was a child, he never showed any interest in studying or working. His hobbies consisted of going out with friends, playing video games, and living without commitments. Gabriel, as much as he loved his brother, was always worried about his future. The differences between them were glaring, and the way each one led their lives ended up causing family friction. As the years went by, things only got worse. While Gabriel was flourishing in his career, Leon was bouncing from job to job, never staying in any one place for long. He was fired constantly, almost always for cause. The reasons ranged from unexcused absences to lack of interest in the work and even bad behavior. And each time Leon was let go, the tension in the family grew. Gabriel and Leon's parents, Marta and John, always tried to protect their youngest son. They saw Leon as someone who had not yet found his way, and they constantly found excuses for his failures. To them, the world was unfair to Leon, and somehow the blame for their youngest son's lack of success fell on Gabriel. Marta, a soft-hearted woman who always cared about her children's well-being, often tried to convince Gabriel to hire Leon at his company. "He just needs a chance," she would say. "If he works with you, I'm sure he'll change." John, on the other hand, was more direct. He believed that Gabriel had a moral obligation to help his brother. After all, family was everything. "Gabriel," John would often say, "you have more than enough. The least you can do is give your brother a chance. He needs stability, someone who believes in him. You have the means to do that." Gabriel would often try to explain that the problem wasn't just giving Leon a chance, but that his brother had never shown any interest in putting in the effort and actually working. Hiring him would mean jeopardizing the company he had worked so hard to build, and Gabriel wasn't willing to do that. Besides, he knew that if Leon was hired and it didn't work out, the family's problems would only get worse. "Dad, Mom, I love Leon, but he needs to understand that things aren't as easy as he thinks," Gabriel would reply, trying to remain calm. "It's not just about getting a job, it's about keeping the job, it's about working hard. It's about proving that he deserves to be there. And he's never shown that he wants to do that." But Gabriel's words were rarely well received. His parents, blinded by their unconditional love for Leon, began to harbor a growing resentment toward Gabriel. To them, Gabriel was refusing to help, was being selfish, and only thought of himself. And little by little, this resentment turned into a chasm between Gabriel and the rest of the family. The years passed, and the family situation deteriorated even further. Leon continued to live a disorderly life, and Gabriel continued to expand his business, now with several branches in different cities. Gabriel's success only increased the tension. His parents stopped visiting him, and family gatherings became rare and uncomfortable. On the few occasions when they were all together, the conversation always ended in arguments about Leon and Gabriel's role in helping his brother. Gabriel began to feel the weight of always being the villain in the story. He became increasingly isolated, immersing himself in work and avoiding family contact whenever possible. The situation reached its critical point when, on one of the rare visits to his parents' house, Gabriel was confronted more directly. "Do you think you're above everyone else, Gabriel?" Marta exploded during dinner. "Just because you got everything you wanted, you think you can ignore your family? You think you can turn your back on your brother?" Gabriel, who was tired of the same old arguments, responded in a tone he himself had not expected to use. "Mom, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to take Leon by the hand and take him to work every day? Do you want me to do his work for him? That's not fair. Can't you see that he's never wanted anything to do with his life?" John, who had been silent until then, slammed his hand on the table hard. "You're the older brother, Gabriel. Your obligation is to help your brother, no matter what he does." Gabriel, frustrated and sad, simply spoke up from the table. "If that's how you think, then maybe it's best for me to step away. I could be the only one to blame for everything that goes wrong in Leon's life." And that's exactly what he did. Gabriel cut ties with his family, limiting himself to sending money to his parents from time to time, but no more visits, no more phone calls. He focused on his business and his own life, trying to move on. The distance between him and his family became irreparable, and Gabriel resigned himself to living alone. The years passed, and Gabriel prospered even more. He expanded his business internationally, becoming a respected figure in the business world. His name was synonymous with success and integrity, and he became one of the most influential businessmen in the country. But behind all his success, there was a void. The absence of his family weighed heavily on his heart, but he knew there was no going back. Then one day, Gabriel received an unexpected email. It was from his parents, Marta and Joao, and the message was short and to the point. "Gabriel, we need to talk about the inheritance. You already have a lot of money and don't need any more. We have decided that your share will go entirely to Leon. I think that is the fairest thing to do. We hope you understand." Gabriel read the email several times, unable to believe what he was reading. His family, whom he had not seen for years, were now taking from him what was rightfully his, claiming that he already had more than enough. The shock gave way to a mixture of anger and sadness. It wasn't about the money, Gabriel had more than enough, but about the lack of attention, the injustice that seemed to have no end. He closed his laptop and remained silent, trying to process everything. How had things gotten to this point? How could his own family treat him with such contempt? The feeling of abandonment and betrayal that I felt at that moment was like an open wound. He knew that no matter how hard he tried, he would never be able to forgive his parents for that. The following days were difficult for Gabriel. He tried to focus on work, but the idea of being abandoned by his parents in favor of Leon consumed him. He began to question his own actions, whether he had been too hard on his brother, whether he had done something to deserve such treatment. But deep down, he knew that he had done the right thing, that he had tried in every way to help Leon, but that in the end, he couldn't carry his brother on his back forever. So one lonely night, Gabriel decided it was time to face the situation. He knew that he would avoid the problem that would solve nothing, and that I would need to face reality head-on. He picked up the phone and called his parents. The line rang several times before Marta answered. "Hello." His mother's voice was so distant, almost cold. "Mom, it's me, Gabriel. I got your email," he began, trying to remain calm. "We need to talk about this." Marta was silent for a few seconds before answering. "There's nothing to talk about, Gabriel. We've already made our decision." Gabriel felt a lump in his throat, but it didn't change. "I just wanted to understand why, Mom. Why do you think I don't deserve the inheritance that by right would also be mine?" "The reason is simple, Gabriel." Marta's voice is so firm, but full of resentment. "You already have everything. You built your life, made your money, and you don't need anything else. Leon, on the other hand, has nothing. He needs this money to have a chance at life, to start over. And we think it's only fair that he gets everything. But he's never wanted anything, Mom. You know that," Gabriel replied, his voice cracking. "He's always been like this since he was little. And now you want to take away from me what should be rightfully mine, just because you think he deserves more." "Gabriel, we've already made our decision." John came on the line, his voice hard and uncompromising. "You have a lot, and Leon needs a chance. We're not going to change our minds." Gabriel felt despair inside him. "So that's it. Do you really believe that I'm the villain in this story? That I'm responsible for everything that went wrong in Leon's life?" "We just think he deserves a chance," Marta replied, her voice thick with emotion. "He's our son, just like you. But he never had the opportunities that you had, never had the same luck." "This isn't about luck, Mom," Gabriel replied, feeling his anger and frustration build. "It's about hard work, about responsibility, about doing the right thing. And I've done all of that. I've worked hard to build my life, and now you want me to punish myself for it." "No one is punishing you, Gabriel," John replied second. "We're just giving Leon what he needs to have a decent life." Gabriel felt a deep sadness for himself. He knew there was no point in arguing anymore. His parents had made their choice, and nothing he could say would change that. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his cool. "If that's how you think, then there's nothing more to be done here. I'll respect your decision, but know that as of today, I'm no longer part of this family." Marta tried to respond, but Gabriel hung up the phone before he could hear what she had to say. He was silent for a long time, the emptiness remaining. The feeling of being betrayed by those he loved most was unbearable, and he knew that from that moment on, his life would never be the same. In the days that followed, Gabriel decided to cut all ties with his family. He blocked his parents' and Leon's numbers and moved to another city, where he bought a new house and tried to start over. Although professional success was still on his side, he knew that he could never fill the void left by the loss of his family. But despite the pain, Gabriel found the strength to move forward. He dedicated himself even more to his work, expanding his business and helping other people who, like him, had been wronged by life. He began supporting social causes, offering opportunities to young people who needed a chance, as Leon once did. But unlike his brother, these young people were willing to work hard, to fight for their dreams. Over time, Gabriel found a new reason to live. He realized that, although his family had had experiences against him, he could still make a difference in the lives of others. And with these young people, he found a way to deal with the pain of betrayal. Little by little, Gabriel began to heal. He knew he would never forget what happened, but he also knew he couldn't let it define his life. He had lost the family that raised him, but he found a new family in the people who helped him along the way. And so Gabriel moved forward, stronger and more determined than ever. He was no longer the young man who needed his parents' approval, nor the older brother who felt responsible for Leon. He was simply Gabriel, a man who, despite all the adversities, managed to find his own path in life. And in the end, he knew that no matter what, the most important thing was to maintain his integrity and follow his own values. Because, in the end, that was what really mattered. And that's the story so far. More updates soon. If you've made it this far, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, bye.